Heads on spikes in a lake. What's not to like about getting an introduction into an archaeological topic? So we'll try to illuminate what's behind the gory headlines.
Yes, it is a very gory headline, isn't it? But something that turns out to be an awful lot more complicated than would at first appear. This is
Don't expect any answers here, folks. This is one of those where many questions, not so many answers. It's unusual, which is why it makes its way, into the headlines, I guess, and onto this. Well, this is not the first time we've covered it, mind you, is it? Way back in the day.
No. We did mention it very briefly a long time ago, but it's interesting.
Timely too.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It's in East Central Sweden, and it's in a place called Kanaljöden. And basically what happened was workers were demolishing a section of railway that was crossing the river Motala Ström. And they found this. It's a swampy lake, basically. And in the middle of this swampy lake, archaeologists found that this was an artificially built island. And we're talking about 7,500 years ago, roughly. And on this artificially built island were the remains of 10 people. 2 of whom were women, 1 was a baby, and some of them they're just removed skulls placed on spikes. Now, only two of the skulls on spikes. The impression that gives, when you read the headline, you probably, you could well have thought that this was one of those classic things that you see in movies where you put the heads of your enemies or heads of criminals on spikes to, display your victory over your enemies.
Or, as I've implied in the thumbnail, as a barrier beyond which you shall not pass.
Yes.
Abandon hope, all ye who go past these 2 skulls sticking up the lake, that kind of thing. Sorry for being facetious about that.
But the interesting thing here is that these people, well, they seem to have been revered in some way because they'd all sustained injuries, but they had not died of their injuries. So they had cranial injuries. They'd been smacked over the head with something, but the injuries had healed. So whether these were people who had survived battle or they had certainly survived violence, and it looks like it was an excarnation situation. This was a secondary burial that in most cases here, the heads were removed from the bodies and it was just the heads that were placed on this small section in the river. Now, along with the human remains, they also found a number of animal remains. They were bones of bears, deer, boar, and badger. And
so I'm, in my mind, I've got this visualization of an artificial island, quite long, quite large actually, not far off, sort of Crannog size in a way, but with this pile of animal and human bones on top of it. Whether that be peeking out above the water, I don't know, but presumably the skulls on stakes were amongst all this. I just wanted to try and paint a little bit of a picture there.
Yes, I think it must have been It must have been well above water level, wouldn't it be? I mean, obviously, we don't know how much, but interesting that the animal remains were separated out, so they were categorized, if you like. The bear bones, as in bones of bears, were separate from the bones of boars, for example. They were all categorized out. What symbolically that represented, if there was something
bearing in mind that the animal bones, I think particularly the bear bones, had shown signs of butchery. And another interesting aspect of the skulls was that only were there a couple of jawbones? But alongside the skulls that are in this pile, the jawbones are mostly, if not entirely, missing. Now, that doesn't happen by a natural process if the skulls have been placed whole in the water, because it's the skull that's more likely to be carried off by, this is still water anyway, but it's the skull that's more likely to be carried off by water rather than the jaw, although inevitably jaw and skull will separate naturally. So either they've been removed deliberately, or the absence of the jaw as a result of the excarnation process, which maybe careless to lose the jaw, but whatever the process. But it's interesting, the jaws did not make it into the collection in the lake.
It is interesting.
Actually, having said this about it being observable from above the water, I think in the paper they would have mentioned, because that would have a particular effect on any bone that was exposed above the water. And this all seems to have been preserved below water. So the image I've got in my head is more of a sort of a votive area in the centre of this lake, which they know, has this underwater island, this underwater land on it, on top of which they're depositing bones into the water, which are not going to be seen again, but the position marked by two skulls on stakes. That's the vision I've got in my head.
Yeah, why not?
So
why not?
Other visions are welcome.
Can you imagine that on a misty morning? Yeah, that would look very moody. Now, there's another aspect here as well, that they ran DNA sequencing on several of the remains. That's how they found out that two of them were women. But also, two of the men were related, not closely, so they weren't brothers, but they could have been cousins. That's quite interesting. But they also know that their diet was high in protein, mostly from fish. So again, getting a sense of how these people were living. They defined them as fisher gatherers as opposed to hunter gatherers. But
fair enough.
Yes, aquatic mammals, nuts and berries in their diet, apparently.
Yeah. So a few other aspects of this to have a talk about. First of all, just a quick, I'd like to say thank you for watching, folks. Much appreciated. And if you can spare the time, check to see if you're subscribed to the channel. It's amazing how many people that watch the channel that aren't actually subscribed, something like 80%, something ridiculous like that. So do hit the like and subscribe button. The subscribe button would help us get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, which is our goal. The other way you can help us, of course, is by having a look at our Buy Me a Coffee site, where you'll find out all about our GÖBEKLI TEPE to Stonehenge project, which I'm happy to say has just begun to bear fruit. And you can see the first content emerging from that, which was put out just last week. Our output from having spent 3 days exclusive access, all areas access to the complete excavated area of GÖBEKLI TEPE. I promise you won't have seen anything else like it anywhere else. So that's just the beginning, though. We've got to get across Europe. We've got to get to Wiltshire first. So, but you can help us do that. Go down to our Buy Me a Coffee page and see if you can see a way that works for you to help us out. And of course, becoming a Patreon supporter would be good as well. That's if you prefer to go down a subscription route to helping us benefit. That, of course, is that you get other stuff like a special weekly podcast nobody else gets, and behind the scenes stuff, and a regular Patreon catch up. I think that's all I need to say about that. Thanks for your attention. Yes. Let's move on.
Other than the fact that there's years of specifically Patreon stuff on the site. So if you like the content, there's loads of it that's exclusive to patrons. But yes,
So with two things, I think we have to address the thing that this site is unique, certainly as far as Nordic and Scandinavian burial practice or funerary practices as known, because in other sites from this time period, we're talking about single burials and vaguely, but incarnations of people. This expression of a funerary practice seems to be quite unique, which is why we're sort of paying attention to it. The other thing is that we have to address, and we're reluctant to, because it's also easy to leap to conclusions, and there is a problem with the size of the sample rate, and we're talking about 2 female skulls and the 7 male
men and a
skulls.
baby. Yeah.
And I think, obviously, the baby does not show signs of this, but as we've mentioned, the skulls do show signs of blunt force trauma, strong blows to the head that have left a lasting impact, that have not resulted in death in these instances, but nevertheless have left relatively severe injuries to the skull, and by Lord, they would have hurt. Gee. So no mean things. The interesting thing is that the archaeologists in the paper, sorry, I've forgotten her name, Sarah Gummerson,
Yes.
Fredrik Heilgren, and Anna Kjellström.
Well done.
Draw attention to the fact that in the sample that they've got, in the skulls that they've got, the male skulls have single blows to the top and forefront of the skull, and the female skulls have multiple blows more towards the rear of the skull. Now, that could just be the result of randomness in such a small sample size. You could well have that kind of pattern emerging, and it's sort of dangerous, we think anyway, to draw any firm conclusions about differentiation there. On the other hand, it does, set the mind wondering about certain aspects of it, for sure.
Yes. Well, there's so many ways you can interpret those injuries, but as you say, it's such a small sample size that you're making it up, really.
Yes. Whatever you decide says more about your attitude to human nature than it does about...
Exactly, yes.
I'm afraid. Yeah. But it is important to mention those two aspects. So, make of those what you will. Hopefully, I'll have put the diagrams included in the paper on the screen right now, so you can make your own minds about that. Decide what your own attitude to humanity's how people treat each other now and in antiquity.
Yes, there is some darkness
I don't think
in
there's
the past.
Really.
No, that about sums it up, really. I think research is ongoing, but yes, it's a fascinating glimpse into another way, isn't it?
The under the water.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all those elements, I think, that spur the imagination about what was possibly going on. And I think that's the main purpose of attention, drawing attention to something like that. There's a kind of sort of gothic, romantic story and narrative that all layers of you could invent on top of this. So, yeah, knock yourselves out.
Indeed. Yes.
That one.
Excellent.
So that's it, folks, for the time being. Thank you so much for watching. As I say, have a look at our Buy Me a Coffee page and our Patreon page, and hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already done. But thanks for now. See you next time.
See ya.